Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're having a good time in the conference today. So, the next session that we have for you today is Saas First mindset. So, even though Saas is everywhere now, the mindset is the key. Let me introduce our panelists for this session. So, Abhilash Verma. Hi, Abhilash. He serves as Vice President Product Management at Citrix. He's responsible for strategic direction of Citrix application delivery and security portfolio. He's leading the forward-looking vision of Citrix ADC service initiative to bring the ADC portfolio close behind cloud native and SaaS. And before joining Citrix, Abhilash worked with Mahindra Consulting. He also holds CISSP and SAN security certifications. Sasi Challa Tadepalli. Hi, Sasi. She's a strong engineering leader with over 25 plus years in the industry. She's the director of engineering in cloud systems and setting up the Hyderabad team to build strong enterprise products for Google Cloud. Before joining Google, Sasi was with CA Technologies, Broadcom, Microsoft, Alcatel, VeriSign, and NTN Technologies. Sasi is highly passionate about diversity and inclusion. She has been on the advisory council of Grace Hopper celebrations in India. Arun Kumar Parameshwaran. Hi, Arun. He's instrumental in leading Salesforce India. Prior to this, he was associated with Vmware as the VP for the enterprise business. Arun worked in various leadership roles at Red Hat, Mastech, Highgate, and Wipro Infotech. He is a multidisciplinary business leader with over 28 years of experience in leadership roles across India, USA, Australia, and Singapore. He has rich experience on working with Indian customers in their digital transformation journeys. He is also deeply aligned to equality. Our next speaker is Rahul Goyal. Hi, Rahul. He is responsible to lead end-user computing organization in India that enables anywhere workforce strategy for VMware, delivering products on Horizon Enterprise, Horizon Cloud, as well as Unified Endpoint Management, which are all part of the Workspace ONE suite. Rahul was the VP of Engineering at Intuit, leading the Mint and TurboTax offerings. Our last panelist is Rubina. She's an IT director with VMware. She drives strategic initiatives like VMware on VMware for APJ, patents and innovation program, IT portfolio analysis, and women at VMware for APJ. She worked with Wipro and Citrix in the past. She's a certified PMP and Green Belt in Six Sigma and experienced in spearheading lean innovative projects. She's a passionate diversity and inclusion champion. So Rubina will be the moderator for this panel discussion. And without much further ado, let's dive right in. Over to you, Rubina.
Hey, hi everyone. Good afternoon. And thank you so much for your time today. Let's quickly get started into this topic, which is like on the top of mind. We hear leaders speak about it, and it's SaaS mindset. SaaS first. What does it really mean, for engineers like us? What does it mean for leaders? And what does it mean for an organization? So let's delve and decode this with our esteemed panelists today. To begin with, Arun, can you share your thoughts on why is SaaS first so central for any organization that is undergoing transformation?
Sure. Appreciate getting an opportunity to be here. I think if you think about, and I think the answer would have been very different in 2019 versus what it is today. If you think about the last 18 months and what the pandemic has done, it has accelerated the digital ambitions of almost every organization. It doesn't matter whether you're a 10-person company or you're the largest enterprise. I think the challenge in front of everybody is how do they transform themselves so they don't get disrupted. And so when you start with that basic mindset and speed and agility is the starting point, SaaS becomes the only option, right? Because the notion that you will build everything in its pieces and bring them together fundamentally gets challenged both in terms of cost and time. And so when you think about SaaS and the ability to bring those capabilities and time to market much faster, today it's the place where everybody's going, and it's no wonder that everybody is SaaSifying the companies, so to speak, because they recognize that companies are able to jump onto that bandwagon. Now, from a customer standpoint, in addition to the time to market value, the security, and everything else, I think there is also the ability to buy on consumption, right? And so the way I think we will look at this 5, 10, 15 years from now is when everything becomes a consumption mode. Was not the case prior to the pandemic. People were still living in the in the era of on-premise infrastructure, buying licenses, and I think I lived in that world for a very long time too. So, but I know now that I think that switch has been flipped, and customers are looking to move to this new world of delivering everything in a SaaS model. And it assumes that, by definition, SaaS is equal to cloud. So of course, in India, there is still a lot of holdouts. There's a lot of questions on, is cloud secure? Is cloud cheap? Is it expensive? I think, the time has come, and maybe Sasi can throw a lot more light on this. I think the time is well behind us in terms of those conversations. What we are seeing from our customers today is an acceleration from everybody saying, how can I get there? Organizations, I can tell you, I was speaking to a regular, what I call brick and mortar, fashion retailer. Not in their wildest dreams did they think that they have to go online. Because they're such a niche player, they thought they could do it with their 5 stores around the country. They're having to go online today for survival. So this is no longer a nice to have. In my opinion, this is survival. This is about not being disrupted and staying ahead of that.
Thank you so much, Arun. And if we were to break it down for engineers, for them to understand what exactly the SaaS mindset is all about, how would you explain it to them, Shashi?
Hello, Rubina, and thank you for having me here. Before we get to the engineers, I do want to say to what Arun said. Yes, traditionally, like the smaller customers, like the brick and mortar fashion retailer that you talked about, Arun, would not have thought of SaaS. But actually, the value for those customers is actually much higher in the SaaS world. Their investments upfront can be smaller. They can actually take smaller steps and expand and scale as their business scales, right? So it may sound, again, counterintuitive, but SaaS is actually a very good option for such small customers. Now, from an engineering perspective, in my opinion, engineers look at any problem from 3 dimensions. 2 come naturally to them, right? Their innovation and complexity. Every engineer wants to work on complex, innovative solutions. The third one is the business and the customer. Now that we learn as we grow as engineers, we learn about the importance of catering to our businesses and our customers over time. Now, it can be, very intimidating at first, because the first 2, while they'll be serving the engineer's career path, they may seem like they are, against the customer's needs. But actually, when you break it down to what the customers need, to what you are building for them, it actually comes together very well. And now you take this fuzzy concept of SaaS mindset and break it down then into smaller steps. Engineers love doing that. They can break it down into how do you containerize? How do you build hybrid solutions for your customers? How do you migrate all the data of your customers from where they are today in a private data center, in an on-prem, to SaaS, to the cloud? Now, when you can break it down that way, the problem doesn't, it's no longer fuzzy. But above all of this, I think one of the things that we should remember as engineers is changing our mindset from building products to building services and managing these services. That's the key difference, I think, in engineers.
Thank you so much, Sashi. Yes. And what do you think, Rahul? Like, what are the typical mindset pillars that we need to, evangelize to build that into our culture and DNA?
Thank you, Rubina. And just building on what Sasi started, right? I think one simple way to think about SaaS is, as an engineer, is imagine somebody buying life-saving medicine, swiping their card, and that needs to get approved, and you're in the middle of that transaction. Now, imagine you're sitting right there, and it won't go through unless you do something right. So that's the kind of responsibility that we own as a product team. Is you're sitting in the middle of customers' critical business flows, in the consumer's critical business flows, and from there starts the journey of the mindset itself, right? So there are obvious ones. For example, when it comes to operability and supportability of the products that you buy. So if you think about a pillar and think about operability, is how easy is it to deploy and maintain and troubleshoot your software, right? If it is not, then it is likely that something will happen and that life-saving drug transaction may not fully happen. The other one is in terms of resiliency and performance, right? How solid is your stuff? I mean, it's software, it does break. The question is, how quickly does it recover? Does it offer parts? And how performant is it? How long do you have people wait for things to happen? The very important concept here is of velocity. I think everything that needs to happen in the SaaS world needs to happen at the 10x speed of what used to happen, right? So how are our systems gearing up to operate at that velocity? Right? So if you were serving, 1,000 transactions per second today, and you're successful, it is likely that you'll be serving 10,000 transactions a minute, a second in the next few years. Right? Is your software ready for it? Very important concept here, which I think sometimes get overlooked in all the technical things that we do, is the consumer angle on it, which is consumability. Right. One framework that often has been used is the framework for jobs to be done. Right. Clayton Christensen had shared that framework with all of us, and essentially what he says is that there are a lot of jobs that jobs don't change, but how we do them change. For example, 1,000 years ago, people used to communicate sending a letter on a horseback to another place. Today, we send a WhatsApp message and boom, right? You get the same job done, but you get it in very different ways, right? So the ask for that instant consumability, how well is your product? How quickly can you deliver the benefit that your customer is looking for? I think that's another very important pillar of being a SaaS mindset company.
Thanks so much, Rahul. Yes, and if we break it down further into the product, like Abhilash, what do you think are the changes we need to drive in a product to drive consumability?
Thank you, Rubina. Actually, before I talk the SaaS world, let's a little bit understand the non-SaaS world, right? I mean, in a non-SaaS world, in most cases, the product and engineering, you deliver, you celebrate, you move to the next, right? It's like a manufacturing, right? You keep on delivering without having to really worry about how customers are consuming and what is the experience they're running into. And that suddenly changed in a massive way with SaaS, right? Because in SaaS, you deliver, and before you kind of take a break and come back to your seat, you will see what customers are going through, right? The information and the experience is real time, right? And before the SaaS world, the choices were limited. Choices for customers were limited, and choices for you were limited as a vendor. And now today, there are all these choices available. So consumability is kind of one of the super important factor for SaaS success, right? I mean, it's very simple. You can say, if you can't consume, you won't use it or you won't come back to it, right? Now, when we start with the SaaS journey, and we have done this over the last several years at Citrix, when you start with the SaaS journey, you want to kind of replicate the non-SaaS or the on-prem world out there, and then you start with a lot of data and information, and over time you realize that, hey, it's all about limited data. It's all about clarity of information, hiding all the complexity, which the user or the end customer doesn't have to be bothered about when they begin their SaaS journey, right? How can you create a zero-touch experience, which means automate, and stuff which took 10 steps to do in a non-SaaS journey should be done in a 1 or 2 step. How do you build guided workflows, right? In many cases, there is very little touch point in between the customer and the SaaS. I mean, it's like a human to machine interaction. So how do you build simplified guided workflow which can take the customer through the end-to-end journey? Another super important point we pay a lot of attention to is friction points in SaaS, right? So if you as a vendor can identify your friction points ahead of time, you can actually work around. And doesn't matter what kind of SaaS you build, and especially for companies like Vmware or Citrix, or companies who have been in the non-SaaS world for like 25, 30, 35 years, and then we transition to SaaS world, there will always be friction points. How do you understand the friction points ahead of time, document the friction point, and create workflows which minimize the frictions, or create experience around the friction point so that you can let the customer continue with the journey, right? There's another way to look at it. We call it the content on your SaaS must be scannable, right? I mean, there is one aspect of readability, and there's another aspect of, hey, can I look at the page worth of content in a bit and piece and scan and make it out that, hey, how these two things connect to each other and create a journey, right? So there are a lot of these factors, Rubina, which actually help drive the consumability in SaaS. And there are a few more I may want to add, like things like telemetry is super important, and customer engagement measures are super important. Customer success plays a really important role. But all of that comes next once you have a solid SaaS with the right set of workflows, experience, zero-touch experience built into an automation, built into the product, into the offering.
Thank you, Abhilash. I think there are really some great nuggets that you shared there. Identifying friction points is, yes, so very important. It was great to hear each of your perspective around the mindset. Next, we would think is, okay, we build the mindset, we are building the culture. How do we measure it? Only if you can measure, can we actually monitor our progress. So getting into that, like Arun, what would you say is sort of the winning combination for SaaS? What do you think is the topmost thing we should be focusing on to get to the gold standard? You're in mute, Arun.
Sorry, I was saying, there's probably three attributes that I look at in terms of, what will help a company be successful in SaaS. The first one, obviously, is innovation, right? By definition, that's table stakes, right? If you're not innovating at a pace that allows your customers to achieve their business outcomes and helps them drive that agility and that experience that they want to deliver to their customers, you're pretty much dead in the water. So you assume that that's there. But I think the bigger challenge is in the SaaS world is going to be adoption. Because by definition, when you think about SaaS and the financial model being subscription through which you deliver that, right? You could very quickly get into a situation. I'm talking about this as a SaaS from a company perspective, but it's also equally true for the customer, because you're basically paying for something, and if you don't adopt and you don't find a way to be successful from an adoption standpoint, it fundamentally questions and kills the whole financial model behind it, which is the subscription model, right? So success, customer success becomes, an obsession. And if you look at most SaaS companies, almost every SaaS company will have an organization called customer success, right? By definition. And I think the third part is, one of the conversations that one of the panelists said before, the whole mindset of how support is evolving is changed with SaaS, right? I think the CEO of Vmware said this a few years back. He said, in the SaaS world, if you write the code, you support it. In the world of perpetual licensing, somebody wrote the code, somebody else supported it, and the sales guy was stuck in the middle. Whereas in the world of SaaS, the engineering teams pretty much become the support teams for all practical purposes as well. And plus, the pace of innovation is so fast that customers are used to seeing things happen literally monthly, quarterly. In the old world of software development, it was 18 months before you saw a major update. Right, 18 months is a lifetime in the world of SaaS. So I think if you were to break it down, I would say, in the way I look at it as a SaaS vendor and the way my customers look at it, innovation, speed, and agility. Having that customer success. Sorry, guys. And those I would say would be the three big things that we need to be looking at.
Hey, thank you.
Sorry. The pedals are working from home, right? I can't stop the landline from buzzing.
Absolutely, yes. And so a lot of, I'm sure a lot of team managers and release folks are on this call. Shashi, can you tell us something about, what are some of the proactive processes that would change in order to ensure quality and reliability for the release of any product?
So, yeah. So for any development efforts, right, you need the basic processes for quality. Early testing, CI/CD. You take the user journeys of your customers and you prototype and demo them regularly to them. So, in the SaaS world, what again, like I said before, remember that the product, your product is actually a service. Rahul also mentioned that. And in this, the funny thing is quality, the definition of quality has changed. Sometimes now failures are acceptable. We are okay when, we're not counting our bugs as a metric anymore in the SaaS world, because you can turn around and fix these issues very quickly. And especially in our agile cycle, we are deploying continuously, we are testing and integrating continuously, we are releasing every sprint, every day, and in a few instances, multiple times in a day. So here the dichotomy is, when you're releasing so often, your quality needs to be high. You don't have large test cycles. So your automation and your ability to test smaller pieces of code, smaller components, and your confidence on quality needs to be high. But at the same time, we are acceptable of failures because we know we can fix them. So that dichotomy is a very different mindset and a process change. But another critical aspect, though, is infrastructure, because it used to be, Rahul was saying, a developer wrote code, somebody else deployed it, the ops team deployed it, and the support team supported it. But today, you write code, you own the code. It's yours completely. And so developers now start to think about it, as a DevOps engineer. We are a reliability engineer. We are a quality engineer. We are everything, right? From design to development to deployment to support. So here, your mindset and your process change would be, how do you design for reliability? How do you start focusing on service level agreements, service level objectives, latency, data freshness? This is all, as an engineer, that you need to think of. Decades ago, when I was writing code, I never paid attention to recovery time, recovery point objectives. These are something somebody else thought about. Today, as an engineer in the SaaS world, in the cloud world, these are all changes to your design, changes to the process, because you need to get these requirements upfront, because you have to design differently. And so this is the main difference, I think, as an engineer, understanding disaster recovery, so your reliability and your scalability of your cloud service is high.
It's like almost we are writing code with a change in mind, right? We have to
absolutely.
end in mind.
Yeah, that's where microservices come in, right? So that you write code for smaller pieces, smaller components, so that they can change fast.
Thank you, Shashi. So moving on to Abhilash, what do you think are some of the measurements that we need to score ourselves on in order to excel in the SaaS world? What would those be?
Yeah, absolutely, Rubina. Actually, I would say, as Sasi was talking about, the job of dev and engineering has become so complex, right? Owning end-to-end cycle, including test and QA and and ops and making sure uptime and resilience, everything in the same order, right? The product and the matrices, measurements, they have become very I wouldn't say complex. It's just a very different way to look at SaaS products and business. I mean, in a non-SaaS world, you you would have like yearly and quarterly matrices to track. SaaS means, right, you're looking at like every single day, right? It's growth is critical for SaaS, and you need a lot of measurements for the SaaS growth tracking. I actually look at it. I would break it down into two segments, right? One is B2B SaaS, and the other is B2C SaaS. And the characteristic of the business is quite different. While they both are SaaS, right? B2B, you're really worried about customer acquisition, right? Because the customer has paid for your product. Once they're on your SaaS, they're going to try out everything to experience, and then you want to track matrices like active customers, and you track like monthly active, quarterly active. Sometimes you do track daily active customers. You're very focused on use cases, right? For example, if I'm a B2B SaaS and my customers come onto my SaaS, I want to make sure their use case is complete. For example, you want to do an upgrade from the SaaS for an appliance or a software which is running on-prem. Now you can come to the SaaS, start the upgrade cycle, but then in between you leave. That's a point of worry. That's a measurement I want to be tracked, that why a customer has started a workflow, started an action and did not complete it, right? So the focus in B2B is a lot on tasks executed. And then there is a different set of metrics for business. Like, we worry about annual contract value or annual recurring revenue. ACV and ARR are the most common SaaS business or revenue metrics we talk about. And it's kind of ironical that in the revenue metric, in most of vendors like us, like it's a 20-80 rule. 20% of the customers can drive 80% of your revenue, right? So you look at it from the revenue angle of measurement, it's a different data. You look at it from the active use measurement, it's a very different set of data, right? Because in active use, you're worried about how many people are there, how many customers are there. In revenue, you're worried about, do we have my 20% of those large customers and large enterprises out there who pay me 80% of the value? Now, if you switch gear to the B2C world, right? B2C, as much as customer acquisition is important, many times the customer acquisition happens through so many different channels that many times you don't even have control of it, right? You're really worried about customer retention. Because in the B2C world, in the social platforms, like, it's very easy for customer to like hop from one platform to another platform. So your real thing you want to measure is customer retention, daily active use, how many people are actually logging in versus actually spending time on the page or on the application. Time spent is a big metric. And in terms of business metrics, I think most B2C SaaS companies are worried about the monthly recurring revenue as metric as compared to the ACV or ARR, which the enterprise SaaS product groups are worried about. In total, I would say like the cost of customer acquisition must be lower than the lifetime value of customer on your SaaS, right? That should be like one of the mantras for enterprises, who are offering SaaS solutions. But to sum it up, right? You have to really understand which part of game you are in. You are into B2B SaaS or B2C SaaS, and accordingly, you want to develop and track the right measurement matrices to be successful, right? So that's my take, Rubina.
Thanks so much, Abhilash. Yes, choosing the right metrics is so very important. Coming back to the employee culture, Rahul, how would you say you would measure that the cultural shift is happening in the right direction, or are we going in the right direction? How would you measure that?
I think you saved the toughest question for me, because I haven't figured out a way to measure culture change yet. So, but we can definitely use some proxy metrics around, which is indicative of how the culture is shifting. And like I said, in terms of pillars earlier, right, it's about resiliency, supportability, security, and the point that Sasi talked about in terms of the shifting of responsibility to a developer. Right? A lot of organizations, even today, struggle with, a lot of engineers who are non-millennials perhaps, struggle with the concept of DevOps and DevSecOps, right? So why is this my job? And I think that shift is, that that is necessary today, because the velocity is so high. There is no time to shift responsibility from one role to another. So the shift left culture has to come in. Right? The second part of this is that no matter what role you are, you must know your customer. Whether you're a support engineer or whether you are a college hire engineer just starting your job now. How many touch points does an engineer have today with their customers? Do they get to see what their core flows are? Right. So looking at those proxy metrics of how many times and how often do people actually get to see or experience what's happening with the customer. The third thing is about just in terms of engineering, is our engineering system geared for velocity? Right? Are we ready to, and we can measure those things because the culture is that, everything that is, whichever way it's working today, can be at least 10%, 20%, 50% better and faster in 6 months from now, right? Are we thinking those things? Are those part of our design reviews that happen today, right? And finally, I think, and I'm sure that I'm missing a bunch of things, is when it comes to consumability, which is, again, a very important pillar of being a SaaS company, is thinking in an iterative mindset, right? Are we building things which we can build upon iteratively versus, hey, I have a 3-month release or I have a 1-month release. It doesn't matter what your release cycle is. It's going to be faster anyway, right? It's going to become multiple times a day. So are we designing and rolling out software so that customers can consume it in an iterative way? Right? So the number of customers who actually can start to consume one service and then consume another one and then consume a third one, those are all good things to measure when it comes to how those can be your proxy metrics, but culturally, I think how many times do you have high fives and parties? That's the best way to measure if your culture is in the right place.
So true, Rahul. Yes. And you built a beautiful segue into the next category of, customers. I mean, absolutely, they are the most important.
Arun, I think it's one point on culture. I think one piece that I'm starting to see, and of course, I'm early days for me in my new role, but I feel like, culturally, the notion that customer success is not a function of, one particular group that calls itself customer success, but it's something that everybody embodies. I think is probably the biggest mindset change that, you will have to see in a SaaS company. If you want to be successful, this is not, somebody carries a customer success manager title and that's just, it's his job to see the customer successful. The definition of SaaS and the financial model of subscription is predicated on that. So I would say culturally, probably the biggest rock that every organization has is how do you get everybody to think about success as their primary mindset. And, I think if you can do that, that goes a long way in my opinion. Sorry, just thought I'd throw it in there.
Brilliant point, Arun. Yes, absolutely. I think each one of us need to feel successful and responsible for customer success. So how would you, Arun, say that the customer expectations are evolving for SaaS?
Look, I think the biggest opportunity and challenge, depending on which side of the fence you sit, is addressing where customers are going today. And I'll give a classical example, right? Think about how you service a customer. Now, the reality is that every organization has to deal with omnichannel as a reality, right? The customer is going to pick up the phone, call you. They're going to go on your website, provide some feedback, through a bot. They're potentially going to send you, you're going to try and market to them on email and messages. They're going to respond to you there. There's WhatsApp. How do you make sure that as an organization, you have the ability to respond to all of these different things that are coming at you, but still have a single view of the customer and therefore then deliver that kind of unique experience that will look at it and say, you know what, that's a great experience, right? And so today, this is a country that's known for WhatsApp, right? Everybody's on WhatsApp. Everybody does everything on WhatsApp. Hell, my parents now are ordering food on WhatsApp through a bot that's been, built here in Bangalore, right? And so if you think about the transition over a period of time, right, and if you think about the customer expectations and how they want us to be able to serve them, that is driving a lot of the innovation at the back end, right? And that's forcing all of this to happen at lightning speed. And therefore, I think the good news is that, I think Steve Jobs famously said, my customers don't know what they need, I have to tell them. I have a feeling that, the way it's evolving, the consumer evolution that we're seeing, they're telling us what they want, right? And therefore, the ability for us to respond to that, and at the speed and agility that's required to respond, that is driving, pretty much everything into that SaaS model. Just coming back to why SaaS, that whole customer requirement, that ability to have that great experience, the ability to have omni-channel capability, to have a single view, right? This whole notion of, single source of truth or customer 360, right? I think is a journey. I don't know if there's a destination called customer 360, or like you can get there and say, yes, I've got it, because it's a journey. And as you integrate more systems, it creates more challenges. And so in the long run, I think the companies that get a better handle on this, I think will come out on tops.
So true, Arun. Moving on to the next, I think this is also a little tough question for you, Rahul. How do we manage or handle the moving target of cost of a solution?
As an engineering leader, I run a cost center. So, saving money is not my first target, but definitely helping customers save money is definitely part of my goal. I think I'll come down to, there are all the regular things about better estimation, right? About how thinking end to end is so important in any kind of an estimation and cost overrun. But I think it is probably easier today to manage cost in a SaaS world because of the iterative nature of it, right? So if we are building products and the customers can think of signing up for service A, B, and C, get to use it with a small set of users, and then add on a D, E, and F, and so on. It kind of evolves, right? So, and it allows you to flex and make feature requests and change it and make it more successful to where you want it to be, rather than trying to force fit a pre-built solution into what your situations are. I think that iterativeness of it, the kind of thinking about it as an experiment to run before you get to an actually full-scale deployment. So experiment, learn, flex, make it stable, and then scale. That helps you to kind of contain the cost without, you're not too far down before you realize you kind of helps you to pull it back.
Thanks, Rahul. Yes, and I think, there are a lot of fundamentals that cuts across many functions, and we need to address them as a foundation. What are your thoughts around this, Abhilash?
Absolutely right. As Rahul was talking about it, I was thinking that, okay, if you really look at the journey from the non-SaaS to SaaS, and Arun also touched on it, it's really a journey, right? It's really a transformation of the entire organization. It's not just about product. It is culture. It is teams. It is how do you collaborate? How do you carry that customer success as the single hat on everyone's head, right? If you want to get to a little bit of specifics, we have come from those organizations where there was product versus dev versus QA versus sales versus ops, and then IT, and then 5 other functions, right? Today, in the SaaS-driven world, the way we all operate is like, like Sasi was saying, talking about the agile development, right? In the agile development, the function of development, function of QA comes together, and it starts to blur around, right? The same developer who's writing code is responsible for the quality and uptime of the service, and then he starts to own this end-to-end hat, right? He's no more worried about, okay, I have done my check-in. Somebody else needs to figure out what happens, when it goes through the test or the automated procedures, right? I mean, he owns the end-to-end functions. Similarly, right, the developers have started wearing the hats of what we now call the DevOps. And DevOps is a so much different or evolved role. Sometimes I sit down and think that, hey, that's one of the toughest part of doing a SaaS and a successful SaaS, because suddenly you are asking the developers to be responsible for ops and outages and uptime and response time and, on the pager duty and, 24/7, right? So sometimes I really feel bad about my folks on the DevOps side, that they have to be, literally up 24/7, right? I mean, they cannot ignore, the pager duty call, because it's part of their responsibility to assure the uptime, right? Then the third aspect, in which possibly Arun can add a little more, is integrated sales, right? Before the SaaS world, like sales would operate like a completely separate function, right? So it used to be funny, right? We would say, hey, we are developing this, launching this in Q2 of 2020. And my sales leader will say that, okay, oh, well, great, good work, but I'm only going to sell it in 2023 because I'm still busy selling what you gave me in 2019, right? So that journey of independent sales to integrated sales is also a massive shift, right? Today in the SaaS world, you deliver, and the sales leaders are like, hey, what's new? What can I talk about new, right? What can I show as a net new value? So that's another big factor of transformation which has happened. And then the whole IT team in the organization, right? When I talk to my CIO, and I'm sure in every organization, the CIOs are thinking much more in a connected platform team approach rather than just the IT who is responsible to deliver end functions, right? So IT transforming into platform and cloud ops to scale the SaaS and the cloud native models is if I have to summarize, right, Rubina, it is like a organization-wide transformation, and everybody is connected in a single dotted line, right? If one function kind of drops a little bit, there's a significant impact on your success end-to-end for that SaaS, which you're delivering.
And so, Abhilash, if you ask the sales guys and tell the guys writing code about time, no sympathy for you guys. If you came from the old world, every sales guy will tell you, I got stuck between engineering and support. Now I don't have to. So it's the best nirvana world for the sales team now to be the SaaS world.
Well, the engineers will say the salespeople are selling what we can't will or don't want to will. So I think, yeah.
Everybody wins.
But then I like what Abhilash, you said about that integrated sales, right? Engineering and sales coming together, and so yes, everybody has to win now because they're working lockstep and barrel right now. So that I think is the transformation. But I do want to say something. Sorry, Rubina, for interrupting your train of thought. But what Abhilash said about how developers used to write code and it's shifted to DevOps, I actually that's really true, right? I've always said this: writing those 2-3 lines of code is the easiest job of a software engineer. How do you design it for those lines to be, efficient and scalable and maintainable? How do you test those lines? How do you support and maintain those lines? How do you deploy that? All of that whole cycle is actually, that's what software engineering is. Right? Just writing code used to be software engineering when I started decades ago, but we have evolved to this. So yeah, totally. I agree with what you said.
So Sasi, that means everything minus sales.
Everything minus sales, but I spent a couple of hours yesterday with the sales customer engineering team, working with the customer, helping them on their SaaS migration journey. So we are getting there.
Cool. And just picking a question from the audience, and anyone is free to answer this. Can you throw some light on how organizations have to re-engineer their operational systems to track adoption, usage, billing, and bookings? How do we plan, size, and implement extreme scale performance along with great agility? Anyone
I
wants to
think
take up?
Abhilash answered that earlier. When that question was being asked, actually, Abhilash had touched upon that. And I think Suman also responded to that now. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. And Shashi, what would you say are some of the biggest lessons that you have learned along the SaaS journey? I think lessons learned are a great medium for us to always do better. So from that aspect, what would you say?
I think we covered many of those aspects in our talk so far. But I was involved in a pure SaaS journey where you build from scratch. It's very rare that you come across those, as an engineer, that you start with a slate, an empty slate. But I have been involved in that a couple of times, and I'll say there the journey for an engineer is easier. It is the best case scenario. You are looking at the latest and the greatest, and you train and innovate for that. But in that situation, what I have come across in one particular case was trying to convince my business partners and my customers that going SaaS, and this was about 10 years ago, so I think things were slightly different than in security, but going SaaS is okay for data security. The loss of control that our teams, the business and the finance teams and the customers felt about loss of control on the data, where they could run queries and get that, and they know which servers and which to reboot or which servers to migrate this data from or replicate this data to. That lack of control was actually a huge hurdle, I would say. We had to go all the way to the CTO to get approval on our SaaS architecture. We were this close to going hybrid with the data on the on-premise, right? So we had to really fight for that. Today, you have federal, data in the cloud. FedRAMP used to be only in one or two clouds, and now we have FedRAMP everywhere, and federal data is on the cloud. So that's one thing that I've learned is, and we were late on that journey to convince our stakeholders about. We finished our POCs. We had our architecture in place when we almost got, a pushback. And so one of the lessons there, I would say, is going back to what the rest of the panel was also saying. It is an integrated effort. It cannot be driven by engineering or by IT. You have to have sales, you have to have your customers, and the entire stakeholder list with you when you plan. The second kind of SaaS transformation is which is more common. You have an on-premise or a hybrid application that you've been working on, that you're selling. You have customers already using it, and then you decide to go to SaaS. We actually did this in recently, a year and a half ago, right before Google, where we had about 450 customers. We called it a SaaS product. It's actually hosted. It's a hosted product, I would say, on a private data center, right? And one instance for each customer. That's what we had. We had a hosted, behind the scenes, minions almost driving this so-called SaaS architecture, and we moved it to true SaaS, actually, in fact, to Google Cloud. And now how do we do that? First, there it was a directive from the IT teams to move, because we didn't want to renew our private data center contracts. So it was a cost-driven exercise where the engineers felt it is almost impossible to do this, especially in the timelines. We were given 18 months to do it. So it really felt impossible. But the way we were able to do it is first convince our engineers that look at it as a once-in-a-lifetime learning opportunity. But the second is, then architecting for not, the engineering of it. We decided to go Kubernetes route because you can't really redo all your services in that time frame. So we were able to migrate. But the most important lesson there again was the initial understanding was we will containerize, we will put everything ready for cloud, but a separate ops team will do this migration, actual data migration of the customers, and that didn't happen. It was the engineers who had to migrate each of the 450 customers to the cloud. We had to write scripts and everything broke, of course, and we changed databases. We changed, we were on the cloud, we had to containerize, and we changed our SSO solution all at the same time. And we were not just engineering it, we were actually doing that migration for each of our customers. And so that ops mindset was a later understanding and realization for the team. And so if we had planned for that from the beginning, we would have engineered it differently, I think, because when you have to go through the pain, you think of design differently, right? And we would have planned differently. So these are a couple of examples of lessons learned from my experience.
Thank you so much, Shashi. I think that's very valuable for all of us here. And looking at just some of the questions coming in the chat, Abhilash, do you want to take this one in the perpetual world? Yeah.
Sure, Rubina. I think you're asking the same question in terms of the journey and experience.
I think we have one, like in the perpetual world, there is a limited incentive to measure product usage. And in the SaaS world, this is everything. So how does an organization decide how much investment to be done for capturing, tracking, and analyzing product logs?
Okay, great question. Okay. So, I'll connect it back to, I think what Sasi was also saying, that the SaaS experience and learning is a journey. You cannot get there on day one, right? So, I'll cut it short. In our experience, what happened is that, like in the last 5-7 years since we started on this experience, it was all about, hey, can I roll the service out? Once you roll the service out, you start to figure out that you don't have enough data points or enough telemetry built into various logical steps or actions a customer must take on the service. Now you start to figure out that without those data points or telemetry built into, you're not going to be able to make right decisions about what's working, what's not working, what kind of new workflows do you need to launch, what kind of simplification you want to build in, what kind of experience you want to change, right? So in the SaaS world, like if I have to do this again, right, go through this journey, the first thing I'm going to define is what are going to be the telemetries which are required from the SaaS experience and the SaaS journey step by step. So almost now I tell the team and when we've been working with the broader ecosystem that, okay, every screen, every step must generate telemetry which you can meaningfully use and then contribute back to the SaaS in terms of improved experience or resiliency or uptime or response time. There could be several things you can connect to, but the value of telemetry and data is like, I think there's no comparison. It's like 100 times, 1,000 times more valuable in SaaS as compared to the previous one.
I mean, just from a business standpoint, right? I mean, if you talk to customers, and if you were to go and tell them that your screen refreshed, 30 nanoseconds faster, you go have a conversation on value, that'll completely fly over his head, right? So one of the interesting things that we're seeing is customers are essentially trying to now articulate value not technically, but in terms of business outcomes, right? And so they're basically saying that, look, if it took me a day to be able to schedule a ticket for repair for a particular appliance and then get that repair done to get the full feedback loop closed, they're saying, can you get that down to 2 hours for me so that I can finish the whole thing and send a thank you email? So the question now is moving away from bits and bytes and bells and whistles, but to actual business problems that you solve and what outcomes that you drive, right? So the question you have to ask yourself is, what metrics are you going to track that's going to be linked to business outcomes? Because at the end of the day, you can do all the logging in the world, right? There are companies that are making a killing out of saving logs and trying to find a way to analyze logs. But the customer, he's living in a different world, right? And his question is, how are you solving my business problem? And therefore, you've got to think through a little bit in terms of what are those connections you can make to business value, because that's what's finally going to drive that conversation, right? When you go back and have a conversation renewing your subscription, or you want to get that. And I'm looking at it from a sales perspective. Even the customer is looking at it from his standpoint, saying, if I have to continue to invest in this, what value did I get out of it? So then you got to circle back and finish. How do you tie the dots to what do I then want to track that allows me to have the business value conversation with the customer?
So true, Arun. Yeah.
Just to add, I think Arun did great to bring in the customer context. So, obviously there are two parts to this telemetry data and logging. One is that how do I make sure my SaaS is operating at the best efficiency, right? So that's like the engineering side or the DevOps side of the data and telemetry which you need. And then the second aspect is that how do I solve the business problem for the customer and what's the business outcome? And you need telemetry and data to track that as well. So thanks, Arun. I think that's pretty important.
Thank you. I think some great insights y'all have shared, and thank you so much for that. Just as a parting note, if you were to say, what can the audience do? That one thing to start building the SaaS first mindset, what would you say that would be?
Customer success. Already said that before. For me, there's only one thing that drives SaaS: customer success.
I would say it's time to stop thinking incrementally. So if you're going to make a car move from top velocity of 80 kilometers an hour to 90 kilometers an hour, you do different things. And if you're building a car that needs to go 500 kilometers an hour, you would do different things. So I think it's important that we start thinking more transformationally rather than incrementally as we think about SaaS. Otherwise, we end up where Sasi was talking about, hosted products that masquerade as SaaS products.
Yeah, agree with what Rahul and Arun said, and I think they're the same things, right? You transform our engineering practices, you transform our business teams and our customers to what end? For customer success. So I think there's not one thing, Rubina. I think everything that we've discussed today goes into building that SaaS mindset for ourselves and our organizations. So somebody was asking a question on, should our dev engineers be part of the customer success team, right? But I think that they're two different teams, but they are integrating more and more, I would say. Like I am spending time with our customer success team when they need to talk to a CTO of a potential customer. They do invite the engineers and even the developers to come and do some brainstorming with our customers. So those are integrating. So be open, I would say, for this ever evolving transformation.
Rubina, I think I can only add point that in my experience, which is very important, is that once you decide to go on the SaaS path, you must bring in relevant skills and experience. Many times we get into this loop of that, hey, we can all learn and we can all do it. In the SaaS journey, time is of essence, right? And once if you lose on time and in the way that you learn and do everything incrementally, I think which is something Rahul also connected to, it's going to be expensive. So bringing the right and relevant skills and experience, make quick progress, right? Move really fast and consider time as the most important value in delivering SaaS experience.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, for spending your valuable time with us. I'm sure the audience, found a lot of nuggets of insights and hearing your experience itself is a great value. So thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.